People have always watched Elon Musk as if he were a force of nature, brilliant, unpredictable, endlessly driven, but very few have ever stopped to look at the quiet presence standing behind him, the woman who shaped the man before the world ever learned his name. Musk has lived a life so rich in resilience and reinvention that her voice carries a gravity few expect, and when she speaks about her son, it isn't with myth or exaggeration. It's with calm clarity. And what she revealed recently, softly, without theatrics, was not something the world was prepared to hear, not because it was shocking, but because it demanded reflection. She didn't speak about rockets or electric cars. She didn't mention wealth or innovation. Instead, she spoke about loneliness, about pressure, about the cost of seeing what others cannot yet imagine. She spoke about the kind of child Elon was, curious to the point of obsession, quiet yet internally restless, often misunderstood. She revealed that brilliance is rarely celebrated at the moment it appears. More often, it is questioned, isolated, even resisted. From the time he was young, Elon didn't simply want answers. He wanted better questions. May described him as a boy who would sit for hours reading, absorbing ideas far beyond his age, then suddenly look up and ask something so unexpected it would leave adults searching for words. Not because they were unintelligent, but because they were unprepared. That pattern never left him. The world, she said, has been playing catch-up ever since. What the world wasn't ready for was the idea that Elon Musk's strength did not come from fearlessness, but from endurance. He felt doubt deeply. He felt criticism intensely. But he learned early that feeling did not have to dictate direction. May revealed that there were times when even she worried, not about his intelligence, but about how heavy the world would feel to someone who saw too much, too soon. She spoke about nights when he barely slept, not because of ambition, but because his mind would not slow down. About moments when failure hit so hard that most people would have retreated into comfort, but he leaned forward instead. Not because he enjoyed suffering, but because he believed that responsibility outweighed comfort. That belief, she said, is not glamorous. It is exhausting. And it is lonely. The message that emerged from her words wasn't meant to glorify struggle. It was meant to explain it. She wanted people to understand that progress is not born from applause. It is born from persistence during silence. Elon did not rise because everyone believed in him. He rose because he kept moving even when belief was scarce, including his own, at times. She revealed that one of the hardest lessons she watched him learn was that changing the future means accepting misunderstanding in the present. People mocked his ideas. Experts dismissed him. Entire industries told him he was unrealistic. But what May emphasized was that he never confused criticism with direction. He listened, but he did not surrender his vision. That distinction, she said, is everything. The world wasn't ready for the humility in her message. She didn't portray her son as a flawless genius. She portrayed him as a human being who chose responsibility over ease, purpose over popularity. Someone who failed publicly, repeatedly, and yet refused to let those moments define the limit of what was possible. She spoke about fear, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet fear that creeps in at 3 a.m. when everything you've built feels fragile. She said Elon never pretended not to feel it. He simply refused to let fear make his decisions. That, according to her, is the real difference between dreamers and builders. What struck many listeners was her insistence that success did not arrive as a single moment. There was no instant victory. There were long stretches where nothing worked, where the world moved on, uninterested. She revealed that during those times, Elon didn't cling to motivation speeches or external praise. He returned to first principles. To the simple question, does this matter for the future? She said that when you orient your life around that question, you stop chasing approval. You stop negotiating with comfort. You stop asking if something is easy and start asking if it's necessary. And that mindset, she warned, comes with a price few are willing to pay. The world wasn't ready to hear that greatness doesn't feel great while it's forming. It feels heavy. It feels uncertain. It often feels thankless. But May's message was clear. If you're willing to carry that weight, even temporarily, you create room for something far larger than yourself. She also revealed something quietly powerful. Elon never believed he was special. He believed the problems were urgent. That distinction matters. He didn't chase legacy. He chased solutions. And when solutions required him to endure ridicule, financial risk, or personal strain, he accepted that as part of the equation rather than a sign to stop. Listening to her, it became clear that the world's obsession with outcomes blinds it to the process. People want the headline, not the years of uncertainty behind it. They want the innovation, not the isolation. May wasn't trying to inspire admiration, she was trying to offer understanding. Her message felt less like a revelation and more like a mirror. If someone like Elon Musk, surrounded by resources, intelligence, and opportunity, still faced doubt, exhaustion, and emotional weight, then perhaps struggle is not a sign of failure at all. Perhaps it is a sign that something meaningful is underway. She ended her thoughts with something that lingered long after the words stopped. She said the future is rarely built by the most confident people in the room. It's built by those willing to be uncomfortable longer than others. Willing to look foolish. Willing to keep going when validation is nowhere in sight. And that, she implied, is what the world wasn't ready to hear. That progress doesn't wait for permission. It waits for perseverance. She continued by speaking about responsibility in a way that felt almost unsettling, because it removed the comfort of believing that success is purely personal. She said Elon grew up with a sense that if you can do something meaningful, you no longer get to pretend it isn't your job. That idea, she admitted, is heavy to pass on to a child. But it shaped him more than talent ever could. She revealed that there were moments when he wished he could walk away, choose something simpler, something quieter. But every time he tried to imagine that path, he felt the same pull. An inner insistence that certain problems didn't care about personal preference. Climate change. Multiplanetary survival. Energy sustainability. These weren't abstract ideas to him. They were clocks ticking in the background of his life. What surprised many people was how directly May addressed pain. She did not romanticize it. She said there were years when Elon carried enormous emotional strain, when public criticism felt relentless, when failures played out in front of the entire world. She acknowledged that no amount of success makes that easy. In fact, visibility often multiplies the weight. She explained that one of the hardest things for him to accept was that being right too early looks exactly like being wrong. When timelines stretch and progress is slow, people lose patience. They assume incompetence or ego. But progress, she said, doesn't follow the speed of public opinion. It follows the speed of reality. May talked about how Elon learned to detach from applause and outrage alike. Praise, she said, can be as dangerous as criticism if you start performing for it. Once you measure your worth by reaction, you surrender control of your direction. Elon learned, often painfully, that attention is not the same as impact. She described times when he would come home exhausted not from work itself, but from having to constantly explain ideas that were still forming. She said the world often demands clarity before it allows creativity, but real innovation is messy, uncomfortable, and incomplete for a long time. Living in that uncertainty requires patience most people are never taught. Her voice softened when she spoke about the personal cost. Birthdays missed. Relationships strained. Moments where the future demanded more attention than the present. She didn't frame these as sacrifices in a heroic sense. She framed them as consequences, honest ones, of choosing a life oriented around large-scale change. What made her message difficult for many to hear was its honesty about trade-offs. She said there is no path where you get everything. You choose what you serve, and that choice shapes what you lose. Elon did not escape that reality. He simply accepted it sooner than most. She spoke about resilience not as toughness, but as recovery. The ability to stand back up without rewriting your identity around failure. Elon failed repeatedly. Rockets exploded. Companies teetered on the edge of collapse. Entire years looked, from the outside, like disasters. But internally, she said, he learned to treat failure as information, not judgment. May also addressed criticism of his intensity. She said people often misunderstand focus as obsession. But when time feels limited and the stakes feel global, distraction becomes irresponsible. Elon wasn't chasing balance in the traditional sense. He was chasing alignment, making sure his time, energy, and values pointed in the same direction. She revealed something deeply human, that despite the image of confidence, he often questioned whether he was doing enough. Whether he was moving fast enough. Whether the problems he worried about would outpace his efforts. That pressure, she said, doesn't ease with achievement. If anything, it sharpens. The world wasn't ready to hear that ambition can come from fear, not fear of failure, but fear of inaction. The fear of knowing what could be done and choosing not to do it. That fear, she said, followed him more closely than doubt ever did. She also reflected on how society treats people who refuse to fit neatly into categories. Elon didn't behave like a traditional CEO. He didn't communicate like one either. That made people uncomfortable. But innovation, she reminded, rarely comes from those who blend in perfectly with existing systems. May made it clear that she never tried to shape him into a symbol. She simply supported his curiosity and his work ethic. She encouraged him to read, to question, to test assumptions. When others labeled him difficult or unrealistic, she reminded him that most breakthroughs begin that way. Her message became less about Elon and more about the listener. She asked, without directly asking, whether people dismiss their own ideas too quickly because they don't fit the world as it currently is. Whether they abandon paths not because they're wrong, but because they're lonely. She said that the world often claims to admire courage, but only after it succeeds. During the attempt, courage is called recklessness. Vision is called delusion. Persistence is called stubbornness. Elon lived inside those labels for years before they softened into praise. She ended this part of her reflection with a quiet warning. She said that if you wait for the world to be ready, you will be waiting forever. Readiness is usually declared in hindsight. Builders don't receive permission, they move forward and let time decide. And perhaps that was the truest part of the message the world wasn't ready for, that the future is not shaped by consensus. It is shaped by those willing to endure misunderstanding longer than most people can tolerate. She closed her thoughts not with a lesson, but with a reminder, as if she understood that the most important truths rarely sound revolutionary when spoken aloud. They sound simple. Almost too simple to impress anyone looking for drama. She said that the future does not announce itself with certainty. It whispers, and only a few people are willing to listen long enough to hear it clearly. May revealed that one of the greatest misconceptions about Elon is that he is driven by ego. She said the opposite is true. Ego, she explained, requires constant validation. Elon's drive came from something far quieter and far more demanding, a sense of accountability to problems larger than himself. That kind of motivation doesn't shout. It weighs. She said there were many moments when he could have stopped, when logic alone suggested retreat. Investors doubted him. Critics ridiculed him. The stress pushed him to physical and emotional limits. But each time, he returned to the same internal question: if this fails, will the problem disappear? And when the answer was no, stopping felt irresponsible. She spoke about how people underestimate the emotional cost of caring deeply. When you care only about winning, losses are temporary. When you care about outcomes that affect humanity, losses feel personal. She said Elon carried that burden quietly, rarely allowing himself to process it publicly because he feared it would distract from the work itself. The world wasn't ready to hear that certainty is overrated. May said her son never waited until he felt completely ready or confident. If he had, nothing would have moved forward. He accepted that progress happens through iteration, through mistakes corrected in real time. Confidence, she said, is often the result, not the requirement. She also addressed the myth of genius as effortless. She said intelligence opens doors, but discipline keeps you in the room. What separated Elon from others with similar abilities was his tolerance for sustained effort. Long hours. Repeated setbacks. Endless recalibration. Talent without endurance, she reminded, rarely changes the world. Her message touched on loneliness again, this time without sorrow. She said solitude is not always the enemy. Sometimes it's the environment where clarity forms. Elon spent many years mentally alone, holding ideas few others could fully share or support. That isolation, while difficult, allowed him to think freely, unconstrained by trends or approval. She spoke about the courage to be misunderstood, not as a personality trait but as a learned skill. Each time Elon faced criticism and continued anyway, he strengthened that muscle. Over time, being misunderstood became less painful and more expected. When that happens, she said, fear loses its grip. May made it clear that she did not believe everyone should live this way. This was not a prescription for happiness or balance. It was a reflection on choice. Elon chose a path that demanded sacrifice because he believed the stakes justified it. Others may choose differently, and that is not failure. What mattered, she said, was alignment. Living in a way that matches what you believe matters most. Misalignment is what creates regret, not struggle. Elon accepted struggle because it matched his values. That made the weight bearable, even when it was heavy. She ended with words that felt directed not at critics or admirers, but at anyone standing quietly at the edge of their own potential. She said that the world will always resist ideas that arrive before their time. It will question, mock, and delay them. Not because they are wrong, but because change challenges comfort. Her final message was simple and unsettling: you don't need permission to pursue what you believe is necessary. You only need the willingness to continue when recognition is absent. The world eventually adapts to persistence. She said she watched her son walk that path, not as a legend in the making, but as a human being choosing responsibility again and again, even when it cost him. And she believed that history would not remember the noise surrounding him, but the problems he refused to ignore. That was the message the world wasn't ready for. Not a revelation about Elon Musk, but a reminder about purpose. About endurance. About the quiet strength it takes to commit to a future no one else can see yet. And perhaps the real question her words left behind wasn't about him at all, but about who else is listening now, and what they are willing to continue building, even if the world isn't ready.